alienation behind the fixtures and fittings, the reader's experience of the book, and our complications of laying out a theory takes second place. Chronologically, since IT insists on being noticed before any language can be processed, to the impact of this printed page, note our opening and the extended bracketed detour, the justified left-hand margins making a claim for prose, but the high proportion of blank space insists on poetry. Infrequent use of the full stop argues for poetic status. It's hard to assess the weight of these commas, which represents the taking of a breath and/or prepares for a sidestep in grammatical structure, since it comes before an actual break in the text, seeming to insist on a pause before a caesura. Choose dashes as a primary resource and you summon up the ghost of Sterne, and the reputation of the ellipsis hasn't fully recovered from its long collaboration with Céline. Why not the EM dash or the French dash or tire at long? Abhorred semicolons only serve to advertise the user's advanced education. Why should a full stop set a little way above another one, or a stop floating over a comma, shift a reader's perception towards artificiality, when the whole business of inflecting a page with marks is artificial? All such marks are conventional, but the compound ones, semicolon, seem provokingly self-conscious, a rejection of the long sentence in all its grandeur, its emulsified assurance. Does a marked underuse of the comma shows not a lack of consideration but a subtle courtesy, by refusing to allow arbitrary subdivisions to get in the way of the reader's attempt to grasp a complex thought in its entirety? If a sentence is chopped into a succession of short phrases separated by commas that halt its flow, the prose gasps for air, whereas the very long sentence, relatively unimpeded by stops, gives the impression of a rush to yield the thought in one exhalation. The question of art's validity, of its ability to justify itself, which has proved increasingly problematic from the late modernist period on, the point in which it became at least partly disengaged from its reliance on representational forms of output mirroring reality, and from which point it sought to entangle its potential answers to difficult questions of justification in pedagogic evasion and instinctual, metaphysical obfuscation, ever suspicious of materialist, cognitive approaches, often in the form of defensive claims to autonomy, and with it the conspicuous implication of secret codes to an especial province of production. To now can be traced back to one significant contradiction. There is no art system without an audience to apprehend its output. At the same time, an audience constitutes a negative, problematic entity. Exhibition constitutes a failure of communication. One could argue the production of art in current conditions of production constitutes a failure of communication, because production is carried out in anticipation of engaging in relations of distribution, and the audience's function is to justify the necessity of distribution, exhibition, publication, etc. What is communicated to the audience through works of art, their meaning, is not much more than the justification of the relations of distribution that successfully coalesced work and audience in institutional, superstructural union. What, within the domain of art production, is being communicated other than the means of communication itself? Publications, exhibitions, reproductions of artworks etc. produced and distributed within this or that fashionable or respected, self-serving infrastructure. The notion of ideas explored within the content or subject matter of the work appears to have been subsumed into a system of commodity circulation and rendered improbable, impossible in fact if communicated publicly. Any such ideas exeunt via the fire escape as soon as the art crowd turns up at the opening. Ideas, for want of a better word, are instead produced, as opposed to being merely shared, within the relations of distribution. Examples of artistic output that communicate some idea, for example materials put together that reference something Lacan might have said. Had he said it, merely become subsumed by their materiality as a means of being publicly apprehended. Whereas ideas that discern some notion of meaning or some discernible meaning distinct from the idea of the means of communication itself will engage with the current art system's relations of distribution as a pathetic, outdated lump. Such a plan would be to try and do something that simply isn't viable in current conditions of artistic production and distribution. It would be attempting to ask, in part, how to go about engaging in the public sharing of a work that is antithetical to being publicly shared. The production of work that does not function as meaning nothing more than the means of being shared in a public context is untenable. An appropriate word for this estrangement of artistic production from what is produced as a failure of communication that initiates production itself within the relations of distribution is alienation. The use of the word becomes instantly problematic, not least by Marx's own variable, multivalent usage. 2. In certain atomized situations there may be art without an audience but no system of art. An audience offers nothing but a negative proposition. An audience looks predominantly but anyway comprehends passively. An audience is reduced a priori in the knowledge of the inevitably reified artwork into its position of comprehending some completed, terminated output of cultural practice. Practice is material and social in a limited sense, but with the intervention of the audience becomes irrevocably definable in terms of social practice. Real individuals, their activity and the material conditions under which they live, both those which they find already existing and those produced by their activity, a definite form of expressing their life, coincides with their production, both with what they produce and with how they produce. 3. Comprehending implies an inert position, something closer to contemplating than apprehending or intervening, that is distinct from accessing knowledge, or from knowing the output being comprehended in any substantive capacity. Comprehending an artwork, for instance, cannot supply us with any knowledge of the real world. It may allow us to see a relationship between the artwork and the real world, but it gives us no access whatsoever. An audience situates itself, as a result of various social conditions, before an artwork. It comprehends the artwork in the past tense. So to write, it is witness to the retrospective appearance of a finite, refined, reified outcome of past social practice that was carried out in specific social conditions of which an audience can have no knowledge in any direct, meaningful sense. 4. In an atomized view of art there are some brief moments of participation from an audience rather than passive apprehension from an audience, such as 1960s conceptual mirrors, knife blade or gloss paint interventions, usually as a form of protest on museum canvases, etc. Generally, though, the audience has no more ability to intervene any more than it has access to any knowledge regarding the social conditions and processes that produce the appearance of the artwork. This is, anyway, stripped out of the artwork through its transition within relations of distribution, the sterilizing process that brought the work and audience together. From this point of view, the conclusion emerges, at least for art in its current manifestation, that it is not a positive social formation to do anything productive in. The audience initiates a social area where large-scale capitalist economic activity and cultural production are now inseparable. Art constitutes a social formation that is both pure ideology and a situation in which, from the audience's point of view, only passive comprehension or contemplation are possible. Yes, it requires this inert form of audience to reproduce itself, to construct itself as a social formation. 5. The prioritization, through its all-consuming relations of distribution within the sphere of art, of exhibition which immediately stultifies development and edification, reduces the comprehension of the exhibited, Distributed artwork to a comprehension of the audience's own alienation. The opportunity to comprehend the artwork is reduced to an opportunity of an audience to comprehend exactly that which it has been dispossessed, which also coincides with the dispossession of the artist as well. The capitalist system initiates this dispossession by producing conditions that are conducive with the individual being incapable of achieving what they want to achieve, manipulated and under the domination of the social power structure. The situation of their alienation. What the work is, what it consists of, is of peripheral significance. Art, as mediated through its system's relations of distribution, succeeds in reducing the audience to passivity against its alleged, self-alleged essence of human development in its richest diversity before an artwork, the weight of which is not measured by its content, whereas art should. Is it capable of anything else? Bring to the audience's attention the social situation in which the art system, including its output, is situated. Instead, it limits and suppresses its audience. The purpose of art in its current manifestation, in the current conditions of its production, which are wholly defined by the current conditions of its distribution, is to keep 1 or 2 steps ahead of its audience's ability to comprehend. 6. Contemporary art walks a fine line between, on the one side, working to reduce the distance between its own position of knowledge or at least self-understanding and the ignorance or inability of the audience to fully comprehend, and on the other side to maintain and retain its position of knowledge in relation to the position of ignorance of its audience. As the audience is continually casting off its ignorance, continually coming to terms with each apparently radical development, art must endlessly devise means by which to obfuscate the audience's need to regain its knowledge. Rancière puts it like this in the context of the teacher-pupil relation in the pedagogical scheme. The ignorant person is not only the one who does not know what he does not know. He is as well the one who ignores that he does not know what he does not know and ignores how to know it. The master is not only he who knows precisely what remains unknown to the ignorant, he also knows how to make it knowable, at what time and what place, according to what protocol. The exhibition of the artwork in relation to its audience is inherently unequal. The author of the work, the system of art, its managers, its functionaries etc. operate within the incidental distance between the ignorant and knowledgeable. 7. If art as an ideology is capable of any real knowledge in relation to the real world, it is just the knowledge of the ignorance of its audience. This very particular, to art form of knowledge is fairly universally known, at least in practice, throughout the various strata of the art system, from the unsuccessful non-participants, or barely participating, of the wealth of failure, to the upper echelons of the institution. It is essentially the first lesson the art student learns, and the means by which they learn to differentiate between school-level art education and art school-level art education. That any apprehension by an audience of what it is they do, critical or appreciative, is ultimately ignorant of what it is they do. It is specifically a knowledge of this ignorance, because they themselves are unlikely to have any knowledge of what it is the audience is ignorant of, but they have acquired enough knowledge to identify the ignorant. The knowledge of an audience's incapacity to fully comprehend, that holds what the artist does in an endlessly reproducing subjective state. This constitutes a definition of arthood. 8. This inequality between the system of art and the audience constitutes a process of stultification. The opposite of stultification is emancipation. An alternative emancipated system of art would maintain no gap in knowledge between the participants of the system and the system's audience, those that comprehend the system's output. That the meaning and values operative within the system would be equally accessible to all engaged in the system. The system of art in its current manifestation, the means by which contemporary art is produced, is itself ignorant, as it maintains the distance between its knowledge of its capabilities and its audience's lack of capabilities. the inherent inequality within the system. The art system responds to this distance by maintaining it, by becoming ever more proficient at suppressing any challenge that the disparity between itself and its audience might produce, by retreating into a special province of production and an encouraging, reassuring obfuscation at the expense of critical or didactic or challengeable meaning. 9. The art system is predicated on a separation between and maintenance of a group that know and a group that don't. That both groups significantly include participants from the opposing groups, that is, artists as gallery visitors and vice versa, and that the statement still remains accurate means there is nothing to actually know. Arthood. Nevertheless, the audience cannot do what the participants of the system can. It is a system based on a dialectic contradiction between a capability and an inability. This contradiction is reproduced and maintained on the basis that the capable group knows this relationship is operative. Emancipation starts from the opposite principle, the principle of equality. It begins when we dismiss the opposition between looking and producing, and understand that the distribution of the visible itself is a part of the inauguration of domination and subjection. Looking, comprehending work within its relations of distribution is an action that confirms the relations of the artwork's distribution. Only if the separation between a capable, knowing relations of production and an incapable, unknowing relations of distribution and consumption is dismantled can the recipient of the work comprehend the work productively, to work closely to construct their version of the work. So to write seems important. Expand. 10. Without the dissolution of the presumption that the artist knows and the recipient of the work doesn't, but what the recipient is capable of taking from the work in terms of meaning etc. is merely a part of what was authoritatively inserted into the work in the act of production, the recipient will remain reduced to operate an inert, passive form of comprehension. The artist's presumption is that the audience comprehends some share of what the artist imparts into the work, that the artist produces and controls the meaning of the work that the recipient of the work might comprehend, if not in full at least in part. The presumption is that the process of comprehending a work focuses on the transmission of the work's meaning through the work from the artist to the recipient, that what the recipient understands is the artist's meaning. It could be argued that this presumption is a significant problem in art in that it contributes to its subsumption into the capitalist mode of production. But there is equally a problem in affecting the opposite to be a solution. That emancipation in the comprehension of the work comes if the presumption of the knowing artist is ignored. That the recipient of the work can understand that which the artist does not know. The recipient comprehending as a result of the artist's capability but not the artist's precise control of meaning. This particular approach is very familiar within the art milieu and manifests itself in statements along the lines of, "If I knew how to explain what the work means, there'd be no point in me making it." The artwork is the thing that is always situated between the artist and the recipient of the work, in both the relations of production, in the form of a sort of prefiguring speculation, and in the relations of distribution where it constitutes the thing that the artist and recipient can refer but which is only possible of offering an unequal, distorted, that is, ideological point of contact between the two. So although the work of art is the material thing that conjoins the artist with the recipient, it also maintains their separation. It is what essentially alienates artists and audience alike, and into alienation.
carefully constructed ruins. I just collided with the future, broke my wandering wings, broke my wandering wings. Burnt out cars, burnt out people, burnt out cars, mumbled to the empty sky. I feel like going fetal, I feel like going fetal in a rain of faces. I feel like going fetal. All force is senseless. All force is senseless. I called the woman I once lived in untidy original. You have no equal. Sister, is there hope? Sister, is there hope? Give me courage. God, give me courage. I feel like going fetal. I feel like going fetal. Burnt out cars, burnt out people, burnt out cars. Give me courage, give me courage. I just collided with the future. I broke my wandering wings. I broke my wandering wings. Pound! 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 The Marquis' son. Pound! 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 The Marquis' son. Pound! 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 The Marquis' son. Burnt out cars, burnt out people. I feel like going fetal. Broke my wandering wings. Broke my wandering wings. Broke the hard, bad pennies barred. Broke me hard, bad pennies barred. In a rain of faces, flash of bitter contact. Future has waylaid. Pound! 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 The Marquis' son. Future has waylaid. No more wandering wings. The future has betrayed me. Robbed and bled. Robbed and bled. Desires chilled. Wince to end my wandering dreams. Broke my dreams of beyond. My dreams of the beyond. My dreams of carefully constructed ruins. I just collided with the future. I broke my wandering wings. I broke my wandering wings. I feel like going fetal. I feel like going fetal. Pound! 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 The Marquis' son. Flash a bit of contact. The future has waylaid. The future has betrayed and bled me. Broke my